They said the horse was easy, beginner-friendly, the kind of animal you could approach with an open hand and a relaxed breath. That single word, easy, sat on the screen like a guarantee, glowing with false comfort as the listing scrolled past photos that showed a tall, dark-coated horse standing still, almost noble, almost peaceful. No signs of danger. No warning in its eyes. And that's how it always begins, with something that looks harmless enough to trust. The man who bought the horse wasn't reckless. In fact, he was careful to a fault. Years ago, life had knocked him down harder than most people ever admit. A failed marriage. A business that collapsed overnight. A long stretch where every risk he took seemed to punish him for trying. Horses had become his quiet refuge, creatures that didn't judge, didn't lie, didn't pretend. He believed that if you treated a horse honestly, it would eventually answer in the same language. So when he saw the ad for this horse online, something stirred. Not excitement exactly. More like hope, cautious and fragile. The seller claimed the horse had been started, lightly trained, and just needed a steady hand. No bucking. No biting. No history of aggression. The videos showed the horse standing in a paddock, ears forward, wind brushing its mane. Stillness can be convincing when you want to believe. And he wanted to believe. After weeks of messages, reassurance, and one final sentence, even a first-time owner could manage him. The deal was done. The trailer arrived just before dusk. From the moment the ramp dropped, the air changed. The horse didn't rush out. It didn't hesitate either. It stood there, perfectly still, muscles locked like stone. Its eyes were dark, unreadable. Not wild with panic. Not soft with curiosity. Just watching. Waiting. The man felt it immediately, a pressure in his chest he couldn't explain. This wasn't fear yet. It was awareness. The kind your body feels before your mind catches up. He spoke softly. Used the same tone he'd used with every horse before. The horse didn't move. Minutes passed. The driver shifted uncomfortably. Finally, with gentle pressure, the horse stepped down. One hoof. Then another. Slow. Deliberate. Every movement measured, as if the ground itself was being tested. When the horse's full weight hit the dirt, it lifted its head and locked eyes with the man. In that instant, something unspoken passed between them. A question, perhaps. Or a warning. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. The horse stood in the paddock, unmoving, while the wind rattled the fence and the moon climbed higher. It didn't graze. It didn't lie down. It didn't call out. Just stood there, ears flicking, eyes tracking every sound. The man watched from a distance, telling himself this was normal. New place. New smells. Give it time. Morning came with optimism. It always does. He approached slowly, led rope loose, body angled away to show no threat. He'd done this 100 times. He took one step closer. The horse shifted its weight. Another step, and suddenly the air snapped. Not with movement, but with tension so sharp it felt physical. The horse's head lifted, neck arched, ears pinned flat. A low sound rumbled in its chest. Not an neigh. Not a snort. Something deeper. The man stopped instantly. Heart pounding. This wasn't fear from the horse. This was a boundary. He backed away, hands raised, breathing slow. The horse relaxed just enough to be still again. No chase. No explosion. Just control. Absolute, chilling control. That was the moment the man realized the word easy had been a lie, or at least a misunderstanding with consequences. By the end of the week, no one had touched the horse. Friends came to help. Experienced horse people. Calm voices. Confident steps. Every single one stopped short of the same invisible line. The horse didn't charge. Didn't run. It simply warned them, ears flat, eyes hard, presence overwhelming. One woman, a lifelong rider, whispered, "There's something different about him," before quietly stepping back. That's when the man made the call. If this horse needed professionals, then professionals it would get. The first trainer arrived with confidence that bordered on arrogance. Decades of experience. A resume filled with problem horses and success stories. He walked into the paddock like he owned the space. The horse let him come closer than anyone else, close enough to give hope. Then, without warning, the horse lunged forward just a step, teeth snapping inches from the trainer's sleeve. The trainer froze. No horse had ever made him freeze before. He backed out slowly, pride wounded, voice tight. "That horse isn't untrained," he said. "He's guarded. And for a reason." One by one, more trainers came. Different methods. Different philosophies. None could cross that line. Some refused to try after watching from the fence. One said quietly, "This isn't about skill. This horse doesn't trust humans. And it knows how dangerous it is." The man lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. Had he made a mistake? Had he brought something broken into his life when he was barely holding himself together? There were moments, dark, honest ones, when he considered giving up. Selling the horse. Sending it away. Admitting defeat. But every morning, when he stood at the fence and watched the horse standing alone, alert against the sunrise, he felt the same pull. This wasn't a bad animal. This was a wounded one. And something in that stillness felt painfully familiar. By the second week, the horse had become a presence rather than a participant. It stood in the paddock like a statue carved from muscle and memory, watching everything and trusting nothing. People talked about it in lowered voices, as if sound itself might provoke something dangerous. The man noticed how even birds seemed to lift off more quickly when they passed overhead, how dogs refused to come near the fence. Animals sense things humans miss. And every instinct on the property was saying the same thing. This horse had built a wall, and it was prepared to defend it. The trainer's failures didn't look dramatic on the surface. No one got thrown. No one got bitten. But each attempt ended the same way, with retreat. With frustration. With a quiet admission that something about this horse didn't follow the usual rules. One trainer tried round pen pressure, moving the horse in slow, controlled circles. The horse complied at first, walking, then trotting, ears locked on the human in the center. But the moment the trainer increased pressure, the horse stopped dead, turned inward and stared. Not aggressively. Not fearfully. Just refusing. The trainer felt it then, that sensation of being measured, and somehow found wanting. Another trainer brought tools. Flags. Sticks. Techniques designed to desensitize. The horse tolerated them all with eerie calm. Plastic bags flapped. Ropes dragged across the ground. Nothing rattled it. But when the trainer stepped closer, inside that invisible perimeter, the horse snapped its head and struck the air with its front hoof. A warning shot. Precise. Controlled. The message was clear. You can exist near me. You cannot touch me. Word spread fast. Some people said the horse was abused. Others whispered that it was feral, barely domesticated. A few even suggested something darker, that the horse was dangerous, unpredictable, beyond help. Those words lodged themselves deep in the man's chest. He'd heard them before, aimed at himself years ago when his life had started unraveling. Unfixable. Too much trouble. Walk away before it costs you more. The man tried to keep busy. Mucked stalls. Repaired fences. Did anything to avoid the long hours of thinking. But every time he passed the paddock, the horse's eyes followed him. Not with anger. Not with curiosity. With awareness. As if it knew he was the one who had brought it here, and was waiting to see what kind of person he would turn out to be. One evening, after yet another trainer declined to continue, the man sat on the fence as the sun dipped low. He didn't carry a rope. Didn't plan to approach. He just sat there, breathing in the smell of hay and dust, letting the day end. The horse stood across the paddock, unmoving as always. Minutes passed. Then something subtle happened. The horse shifted its weight. Took one step. Then stopped. The man didn't move. He stayed there until the sky turned purple and the first stars appeared. When he finally stood to leave, he noticed the horse had moved closer than ever before, not much, but enough to matter. That night, for the first time, the man wondered if the trainers had been approaching the problem from the wrong side. The next days were different. He stopped asking people for advice. Stopped watching training videos. Instead, he watched the horse. How it positioned itself. How it reacted to sounds. How its body softened when left alone. He noticed scars, small, half-hidden marks along the neck and flank. Old injuries. The kind that told stories no one had bothered to record. This horse hadn't just learned to distrust humans. It had earned that distrust. A memory surfaced, one the man rarely allowed himself to revisit. Years ago, during his lowest point, he'd pushed everyone away. Friends, family, even those trying to help. He remembered how overwhelming it felt when people demanded explanations, solutions, progress. How every question felt like pressure, like judgment. He'd wanted space, silence. And the people who gave him that were the ones he eventually trusted again. That realization hit him hard. What if this horse didn't need to be trained right now? What if it just needed to feel safe? The man made a decision that shocked everyone around him. He canceled all future training appointments. No ropes, no tools, no forced interactions. Just consistency. Food at the same time every day. Quiet presence. Distance respected. Some called him foolish. Others said he was risking injury, or worse, by keeping a horse no one could handle. But the man felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. Days turned into weeks. The horse still wouldn't be touched. Still held its line. But changes began to surface in the smallest ways. It started grazing instead of standing frozen. It lay down at night. It turned its body slightly toward the man when he entered the field. Progress that most people would miss. But to someone watching closely, it was everything. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped by. An old rancher with a lifetime of horses behind him. He watched from the fence for a long time before speaking. "That horse isn't mean," he said finally. "He's waiting. He wants to know if you're going to give up like the rest." That sentence stayed with the man long after the neighbor left. Late one evening, as the light faded and the property fell quiet, the man did something he'd never tried before. He sat down inside the paddock. Not close. Not threatening. Just there. He didn't look at the horse. Didn't speak. He let his guard down completely, shoulders slumped, breath uneven, exhaustion visible. For the first time, he wasn't trying to be calm. He simply was. And across the field, the horse lifted its head. Slowly, so slowly it barely seemed real, it took a step forward. The first thing the man noticed was the sound. Not hoofbeats, those came later, but breathing. Slow. Measured. The kind of breath that only comes when an animal is choosing not to flee. He kept his eyes on the ground, resisting every instinct to look up. Every part of him wanted to rush this moment, to claim it, to prove that something was finally working. But years of failure had taught him a hard lesson: forcing progress destroys it. The horse stood closer now. Close enough that the man could feel the shift in air, the warmth radiating from a living body that had kept everyone else at a distance. Still, there was no contact. No touch. Just proximity. And in that space between them, something fragile began to exist. Trust, tentative and trembling, like a newborn thing. Minutes passed. Then longer. The man's legs cramped. His back ached. He didn't move. When he finally dared to lift his eyes, he saw the horse's head lowered, not in submission, but in curiosity. The eyes were softer now, though still guarded. Not empty. Not wild. But burdened. The man had seen that look before. In mirrors. In late nights when sleep wouldn't come and memories pressed too close. That was the night everything changed. The next morning, a message arrived in his inbox. It was from someone he didn't recognize. The subject line was simple: "About the horse you bought." The man hesitated before opening it, heart thudding like it already knew what was coming. The email was long, and devastating. The writer explained that the horse hadn't been lightly trained at all. It had been passed through multiple hands, sold and resold whenever it became too much. One owner had tried to break it fast, too fast, using force instead of patience. Another had tied it for hours, leaving it alone, panicked, trapped. There were reports of harsh corrections, of fear mistaken for defiance. And when the horse finally learned that standing its ground was the only way to survive, people labeled it dangerous. The final line of the email hit hardest. "I couldn't stop it from happening. I'm sorry." The man sat there for a long time, screen glowing in the dark. Anger rose first, hot and sharp. Then sadness. Then something quieter. Responsibility. This horse hadn't failed training. Training had failed the horse. That day, the man approached the paddock with no expectations. Just presence. He stood near the fence and spoke softly, not commands, not reassurances, but stories. About his own life. About mistakes. About being pushed before he was ready. Horses don't understand words the way humans do, but they understand tone. Rhythm. And something in his voice must have resonated, because the horse stayed near. Over the next weeks, the boundary shifted, not vanished, but softened. The horse allowed the man closer. Then closer still. Always on its terms. Always with an exit. The man never blocked its path. Never reached out first. He learned to wait for the invitation. The first touch happened on a morning so ordinary it almost went unnoticed. The man had brought hay and was turning to leave when he felt it, a brief brush against his sleeve. He froze. Slowly he looked down. The horse's muzzle rested there, just barely. Testing. Asking. The man didn't move. Didn't breathe. After a moment that felt like an eternity, the horse pulled back. But the door had opened. From that day on, progress accelerated, not because the horse was suddenly fixed, but because it felt seen. The man began grooming with his hand before introducing a brush. He stood beside the horse without ropes, letting their bodies align naturally. There were setbacks. Days when the horse retreated. Moments when old fear resurfaced. But there was no punishment. Only patience. One afternoon, a former trainer stopped by, curious. He watched from the fence as the man stood quietly beside the horse, hand resting on its neck. The trainer shook his head in disbelief. "I tried everything," he said. "And you did nothing." The man smiled faintly. "I did what it needed." The real test came sooner than expected. A storm rolled in fast one evening, thunder cracking, wind howling. The horse panicked, memories triggered by confinement and noise. It bolted across the paddock, eyes wide, breath frantic. The man's heart raced. Every instinct screamed to intervene, to grab a rope, to regain control. But he remembered the promise he'd made, to never become another source of fear. He stepped into the paddock and stood still. He spoke the horse's name. Then again. The horse circled wildly, then slowed. Its gaze found the man. And in that chaos, it made a choice. To stop. To stand. To trust that this human wouldn't trap or hurt it. That night, as rain soaked the earth and thunder faded into distance, the man rested his forehead briefly against the horse's neck. The contact was mutual. Steady. Trust is fragile when no one is watching. It's something else entirely when the world starts to look in. By the time autumn settled in, word had spread far beyond the fences. People who once whispered now spoke openly. That's the horse no one could touch. That's the one trainers failed with. Curiosity turned into scrutiny, and scrutiny into pressure. The man felt it every time a car slowed near the property, every time someone leaned on the fence a little too long. The horse sensed it too. Animals feel attention the way humans feel weather, before it arrives, before it has a name. The horse grew alert again, muscles tightening when unfamiliar voices drifted across the field. The man adjusted immediately. No demonstrations. No proving anything. He shortened visits, kept routines simple, predictable. But sometimes, even the best intentions collide with reality. The local riding club called one afternoon. They'd heard the story. They wanted to see it. Not out of cruelty, but skepticism. If what you're doing works, they said, people should know. The invitation sounded flattering, but it felt heavy. The man hesitated. He knew what a single bad moment could undo. How quickly fear could erase months of trust. That night, he stood by the paddock long after dark, wrestling with the decision. The horse stood nearby, quiet, present. Finally, the man exhaled. Avoiding the world forever wasn't safety, it was isolation. And isolation had hurt both of them before. He agreed, on one condition. No ropes. No crowd inside the fence. No forcing the horse to perform. Just presence. The day arrived gray and cold. A dozen people gathered at a distance, arms folded, expressions cautious. Some had trained horses for decades. Some had come expecting a spectacle. The horse watched them all, ears flicking, body tense but grounded. The man felt his own pulse quicken. This wasn't about proving success. It was about protecting trust. He entered the paddock alone. Every step felt amplified. He stopped, breathed, and waited. The horse didn't flee, but it didn't approach either. The man spoke softly, voice steady despite the weight of watching eyes. He took a step back instead of forward. Gave space instead of asking. The horse responded with a single step closer. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Minutes passed. The man sat down in the dirt, just as he had that first night. The horse hesitated, then closed the distance. When the man lifted his hand, he did it slowly, openly, letting the horse see every movement. The horse leaned in. Their foreheads touched. Someone gasped. But trust isn't a straight line. A sudden noise, a dropped phone, a laugh cut short, shattered the quiet. The horse startled, muscles coiling, memories surging. In an instant, it bolted past the man, panic flashing in its eyes. The crowd stiffened. This was the moment everyone expected. The failure. The man didn't chase. He stayed where he was. He called the horse's name, not loudly, not urgently. Just enough to be heard. The horse slowed, then stopped at the far end of the paddock. It turned back. The man was still there. Not angry. Not demanding. Waiting. The horse walked back. That was the moment the narrative shifted. Not because the horse behaved, but because it chose. The crowd fell silent. Trainers exchanged looks that said everything words couldn't. Control had failed them. Relationship had not. Later, as people filtered away, one woman lingered. She wiped her eyes and said quietly, "I thought broken meant beyond repair." The man shook his head. Broken just means something was hurt and never given time. Winter crept in early that year. Snow dusted the fields. The horse and the man moved together now, still cautious, still respectful, but connected. On one bitter morning, the man brought out a saddle. He didn't approach with it. He set it down and walked away. The horse investigated on its own, nostrils flaring, then relaxed. Days later, the saddle rested briefly on the horse's back. No cinch. No weight. Just presence. Another test passed. And then came the final challenge, the one that would define everything. A neighboring property needed help moving livestock before a storm. Time was short. Options were limited. The man stood in the barn, saddle in hand, heart pounding. This wasn't training anymore. This was reality. He walked to the paddock and waited. The horse came to him. The storm was already moving in when the man tightened the cinch for the first time. Snow clouds pressed low against the mountains, swallowing light, muting sound. The horse stood still, breath visible in the cold air. No tremble. No pinned ears. Just awareness. The man's hands shook, not from fear of the horse, but from the weight of the moment. This wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. This was about whether trust, once earned, could hold when it mattered most. He placed his foot in the stirrup and paused. Every instinct told him to rush, to finish the movement before doubt could take root. But he waited. He let the horse feel the shift in weight, the change in balance. The horse flicked an ear back, listening. Then forward. Accepting. The man swung up smoothly and settled into the saddle like he belonged there, not as a conqueror, but as a guest. They stood like that for several seconds. Still connected. Then the horse took a step. Outside the paddock, the world seemed to exhale. What months of professional training couldn't accomplish had happened without force, without dominance, without fear. Just two beings choosing cooperation over control. They moved out together, slow at first, then steady, cutting across the snow-dusted field toward the neighboring ranch. The work was hard. Wind stung their faces. Livestock spooked easily in the rising storm. But the horse responded, not perfectly, not like a polished show mount, but honestly. It checked in with the man through subtle shifts of muscle and breath. When something startled it, it didn't bolt. It hesitated, waited for guidance. And the man gave it, quietly, clearly, with respect. By the time the last animal was secured and the storm fully arrived, something had changed, not just between the man and the horse, but within everyone who witnessed it. This wasn't a miracle. It was the result of listening when others had shouted, of patience when the world demanded speed. They returned home as snow began to fall in earnest. In the shelter of the barn, the man slid from the saddle and rested his forehead against the horse's neck, the same way he had during that first thunderstorm weeks earlier. The horse leaned into him, fully, without hesitation. Later that night, as the wind howled outside, the man thought about how close he'd come to giving up. How easy it would have been to believe the labels: difficult, dangerous, unfixable. He realized those words said more about human impatience than about the horse. And maybe he thought they'd been wrong about him too, once upon a time. In the weeks that followed, the story spread, but differently now. Not as a cautionary tale. As a reminder. People came not to gawk, but to learn. The man never claimed to have special skills. He always said the same thing: I stopped trying to make the horse trust me. I started trying to be trustworthy. The horse remained watchful, sensitive, honest. It never became the easy horse from the online ad. And that was okay. Easy isn't the goal. Understanding is. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about animals, about healing, about patience, take a moment. Like the video. Share it with someone who believes some things are too broken to mend. And if you want more stories like this, stories about second chances, quiet courage, and the bonds that change us, subscribe and stay with us. Because sometimes, the ones everyone gives up on aren't impossible.